Fame, fortune, and flashing lights. The world saw the glamour, but behind the scenes, some of Hollywood's brightest stars were living a much darker story. They were adored on the silver screen, but when the applause faded, so did the friends, the money, and the comfort they once knew. Some were victims of bad deals and greedy hands. Others were swallowed by addiction, scandals, or the cruel nature of an industry that moves on without looking back. They went from red carpets and packed theaters to empty rooms, hospital beds, or lonely apartments where no one came to call. These are the untold endings, the stars who shone the brightest, only to leave the world with nothing. Here are 19 vintage Hollywood stars who died, poor and alone. Judy Garland. Judy Garland was one of the brightest scorns of classic Hollywood, lighting up the screen with her unforgettable voice and charm. To the world, she was Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, a symbol of innocence and magic. But behind the camera, Judy's life was marked by pressure, control, and a deep loneliness that followed her to the very end. From the time she was a toddler, Judy's mother pushed her into show business. She began performing at just 3 years old, and by the time she was 9, her life was ruled by long rehearsals and the relentless pursuit of perfection. Studio executives demanded that she stay thin and energetic, giving her harsh diets and stimulants to keep her working. Though she achieved worldwide fame, Judy lived with the scars of that early control. Her dependence on medication and the emotional toll of a career that consumed her left her struggling to find peace. In her later years, financial troubles and health issues weighed heavily on her. In 1969, at just 47, Judy Garland died in a small London apartment, far from the red carpets and roaring crowds. Her story is a reminder that even the most dazzling stars can feel alone in the world. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi will forever be remembered as the man who brought Dracula to life, his piercing stare and haunting accent making him one of Hollywood's most unforgettable figures. To the audience, he was the Prince of Darkness, mysterious and commanding. But behind the chilling roles and silver screen glory was a man who struggled with typecasting, financial ruin, and a life that ended in quiet loneliness. Born in Hungary, Lugosi came to Hollywood with dreams of stardom. His performance in the 1931 classic Dracula made him an instant icon, but the success came with a trap. Studios refused to see him as anything other than the famous vampire, and Bela was left taking small parts in low-budget horror films just to survive. Away from the cameras, Lugosi battled chronic pain and dependence on medication, hoping to ease his suffering. Friends and colleagues drifted away, and the lavish Hollywood lifestyle he once tasted was replaced with small apartments and financial struggles. By the time he passed away in 1956, he had only a few $100s to his name. Bela Lugosi's life is a haunting reminder that in Hollywood, fame can be fleeting, and behind the legend, a star can fade away in heartbreaking solitude. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was once Hollywood's golden boy, a child star who grew into one of the most recognizable actors of the 1930s and 40s. With his boundless energy, charming smile, and undeniable talent, he was the heart of MGM's family-friendly films and the highest-paid actor in the world at just 19. To audiences, his life seemed like a dream: wealth, fame, and endless opportunity. But behind that glittering image was a man who would struggle with broken relationships, financial mismanagement, and a lonely final chapter. Rooney's career spanned more than 8 decades, yet much of his fortune slipped away through a mix of personal choices and exploitation. He went through 8 marriages, each one leaving emotional and financial scars. Trusted individuals, including his own family members, mishandled his money, leaving him with mounting debt and very little security. Despite his immense talent and contributions to film history, Mickey Rooney's final years were far from the glitz of his youth. He lived modestly, separated from the spotlight that once adored him, and passed away in 2014 with little to his name. His life is a sobering reminder that even the brightest stars of Hollywood's golden age can see their fortunes fade, leaving behind a legacy of talent wrapped in a story of heartbreak and quiet isolation. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. was the ultimate entertainer, a singer, dancer, actor, and comedian whose energy lit up stages and screens for decades. As a key member of the Rat Pack alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, he seemed untouchable, living a life of fame, applause, and glamour. But behind the lights and laughter, Sammy faced personal battles, financial troubles, and a lonely ending that few would expect from a man so admired. Born into a family of performers, Sammy's life was spent in motion, chasing stages and audiences from childhood. His talent was undeniable, but his life was filled with obstacles. He faced racism in and out of Hollywood, and despite his incredible career, financial security often slipped through his fingers. Lavish spending, failed investments, and heavy tax burdens from the IRS slowly chipped away at the fortune he earned from years of sold-out shows and blockbuster performances. By the time Sammy Davis Jr. reached his final years, the wealth and glory of his prime had faded. He continued performing to pay off debts, even as his health began to decline. In 90, he passed away from throat cancer, leaving behind an estate burdened with millions in tax debt. Sammy's story is one of dazzling talent and heartbreaking reality. Gary Coleman. Gary Coleman became a household name as the lovable Arnold Jackson on the hit sitcom Different Strokes. His big personality and famous catchphrases made him one of television's most iconic child stars of the late 1970s and early 80s. To the world, he was the picture of joy and success, but behind the cameras, his life was full of pain, betrayal, and financial heartbreak that followed him to the very end. Born with a rare kidney condition, Gary's health struggles began early, and his small stature became part of his recognizable charm on screen. As Different Strokes soared in popularity, he earned millions, but much of that fortune was mismanaged or taken by those closest to him. Legal battles with his parents and former advisors revealed that the young star had been left with a fraction of what he earned. As he grew older, Hollywood turned its back, and Gary found himself working regular jobs just to survive, including as a security guard and store employee. Financial troubles forced him to file for bankruptcy, and his personal life was often under public scrutiny. In 2010, Gary Coleman died at just 42 after a tragic accident at home. He left behind little wealth and a legacy of a child star who brought laughter to millions, yet lived a life of deep loneliness and struggle. Corey Haim. Corey Haim was one of the brightest teen idols of the 1980s, capturing hearts with his boyish charm and unforgettable roles in films like The Lost Boys. To the outside world, he was living the ultimate Hollywood dream: fame, adoring fans, and a promising career ahead. But behind the magazine covers and flashing lights, Corey's life was full of struggle, poor guidance, and the crushing weight of child stardom that eventually left him broke and alone. Haim began acting at a young age, quickly rising to fame as part of the two Coreys alongside Corey Feldman. The pair became symbols of 1980s teen culture, but the sudden attention and pressures of the industry led Corey down a difficult path. Surrounded by the wrong influences, he fell into unhealthy coping habits and made financial decisions that drained the fortune he earned so young. By the 1990s, the roles that once came so easily had disappeared. Corey's attempts to revive his career were overshadowed by his personal battles, and he often relied on small convention appearances or reality TV to make ends meet. Despite his efforts to turn his life around, he faced mounting debt and ongoing health struggles. In 2010, Corey Haim died at just 38 years old in a modest apartment, and sadly, with very little to his name. Dana Plato. Dana Plato was once the sweet, smiling face of primetime television, capturing hearts as Kimberly Drummond on the beloved sitcom Different Strokes. To audiences, she seemed to live a charmed life, growing up in a world of fame and laughter. But behind that familiar smile was a young woman struggling with pressures she was never prepared to face, leading to a life of financial hardship, personal battles, and a lonely end far from the Hollywood spotlight. Like many child stars, Dana's rise was swift but unstable. She began acting as a child and landed the role that would define her career at just 14. Suddenly, she was part of a TV family loved by millions, yet the same fame that brought her joy also magnified her personal struggles. When she left the show as a young adult, roles became scarce, and the fortune she earned in her teens disappeared quickly through mismanagement and poor decisions. By the 90s, Dana was far from the golden image of her childhood stardom, living modestly and often in the public eye for the wrong reasons. In 99, Dana Plato passed away at just 34, leaving behind a tragic legacy of a young life consumed by the darker side of Hollywood. Her story is a painful reminder that fame without support can leave even the brightest stars isolated and unprepared for life after the spotlight. Joe Louis. Joe Louis, known as the Brown Bomber, was one of the most legendary boxers of all time and a national hero in the 1930s and 40s. His fame brought him to the silver screen in newsreels, cameos, and public appearances that made him part of the entertainment world. For a time, he lived the life of a superstar, celebrated as a champion who symbolized pride and hope. Yet behind the cheers and medals, Joe Louis faced crushing financial burdens and a heartbreaking decline that ended in poverty and loneliness. At the peak of his career, Joe Louis earned huge purses from his fights, but mismanagement, heavy spending, and high tax rates left his finances in ruin. After serving his country in World War II, he returned to find the IRS waiting with overwhelming debt. Despite his legendary status, he was forced to keep fighting long after his prime, and even appeared in small promotional events just to cover what he owed. In his final years, Joe Louis suffered from health problems and lived modestly, far from the roaring arenas where he had once been invincible. When he passed away in 1981, he left behind a legacy as one of boxing's greatest champions, but also a cautionary tale about how fame and fortune can disappear without proper guidance. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday, known to the world as Lady Day, was one of the most soulful and influential jazz singers in history. Her voice carried the weight of joy, heartbreak, and resilience, turning songs like Strange Fruit into timeless masterpieces. On stage, she was radiant, captivating audiences with her raw emotion. But away from the microphone, Billie's life was filled with personal struggles, financial hardship, and the kind of loneliness that fame could never cure. Born into poverty, Billie faced challenges from the very beginning. Her childhood was marked by instability, and music became both her refuge and her escape. When she rose to stardom in the 1930s and 40s, the world admired her talent, but she also faced the harsh realities of discrimination and exploitation in the entertainment industry. Personal battles and legal troubles further complicated her life. Years of unhealthy coping habits and unfair treatment by authorities left her career in decline. Even as her voice continued to touch hearts, her bank account and health were deteriorating. By the time she was hospitalized in 1959, she had only a few dollars to her name and was under police guard, a haunting reflection of how the world had treated her. She died at just 4, leaving behind a musical legacy that still moves listeners decades later. Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake was the shimmering blonde goddess of the 1940s, famous for her iconic peekaboo hairstyle and sultry screen presence in films like This Gun for Hire and The Blue Dahlia. At the height of her fame, she was the embodiment of Hollywood glamour, adored by audiences and pursued by studios. Yet beneath the polished image was a life that spiraled into heartbreak, financial ruin, and quiet isolation that would define her final years. Her career rose quickly during World War II, when her image even inspired a hairstyle trend among American women. But fame can be fragile in Hollywood. Veronica's career began to decline after the war, as public tastes changed and her personal struggles began to overshadow her professional life. By the 1950s and 60s, Veronica Lake had vanished from the Hollywood spotlight. She worked as a waitress and hotel clerk, living far from the glitz that once defined her life. In 1973, Veronica Lake died of complications from hepatitis at just 50 years old, in relative obscurity. Her life remains a poignant reminder that Hollywood's bright lights can dim quickly, leaving behind stars who once seemed untouchable, now facing their final curtain in solitude. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was the very definition of old Hollywood glamour, a sultry screen siren whose beauty and talent made her one of the most desired women in the world during the 1940s and 50s. She starred in films like The Killers and Mogambo, captivating audiences with her effortless allure and fiery spirit. Behind the fame, though, was a woman who longed for peace and whose final years were marked by health issues, financial strain, and a life far from the red carpets she once owned. Born into a modest family in North Carolina, Ava's rise to stardom was like a fairy tale. MGM signed her in her teens, and she quickly became a top-billed actress. Her romances with famous men, including marriages to Mickey Rooney, Artie Shaw, and Frank Sinatra, kept her in the headlines almost as much as her films, but the glamour masked a life filled with emotional turmoil. Ava lived extravagantly, and years of heavy spending, combined with declining roles, chipped away at her fortune. As Hollywood moved on to a new generation of stars, Ava retreated to Spain and later London, living a quieter life. Health problems, including a stroke, left her increasingly isolated and dependent on financial help from old friends. In 1990, Ava Gardner passed away at 67, far from the glittering world that once celebrated her. Her story is a haunting reminder that beauty and fame can fade, leaving even the brightest stars to face life's final act in quiet solitude. Bobby Driscoll. Bobby Driscoll was once the golden boy of Disney, a child star whose bright smile and natural charm captured hearts in the 1940s and 50s. He appeared in classics like Song of the South and Treasure Island, and he even became the voice and model for Disney's animated Peter Pan. To the world, he was the perfect picture of childhood stardom, living a life filled with magic and promise. Like many child stars, Bobby's career peaked early. By his teenage years, the roles that once came so easily began to disappear. Disney eventually dropped him, and the transition from adorable child actor to adult performer proved nearly impossible. With his career fading, Bobby faced personal struggles and found himself drifting away from the industry that once celebrated him. By adulthood, he had little money and few opportunities. He moved to New York, hoping to start fresh, but he ended up living in poverty and isolation. In 1968, Bobby Driscoll died alone in an abandoned building at just 31 years old. His body went unclaimed for months, and he was buried in a pauper's grave. Bobby's life is a haunting reminder of the darker side of Hollywood's treatment of child stars. He brought joy to millions as Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. Yet his real-life story reflects the pain of growing up too fast and being forgotten by the world that once adored him. Omar Sharif. Omar Sharif was the picture of international elegance, a Hollywood and European film star whose charisma and striking looks captivated audiences worldwide. Known for his unforgettable roles in Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, he became a symbol of classic cinema in the 1960s. Audiences saw him as a man of sophistication and success, moving effortlessly between Hollywood, Europe, and the Middle East. Yet, behind the charm and fame, Omar Sharif's life took a quieter, more difficult turn in his later years, marked by financial losses and lonely days far from his cinematic peak. At the height of his career, Omar enjoyed wealth and global recognition. He was celebrated for his romantic screen presence and was often seen at glamorous events and casinos, but his love for gambling became a lifelong vice that drained much of his fortune. As the roles slowed and his health declined, Omar spent more time in relative solitude. In his final years, he lived quietly in Cairo, far removed from the world of movie premieres and flashing cameras. He faced memory loss due to illness and passed away in 2015 at the age of 83. Omar Sharif's story is a poignant reminder that even the most sophisticated stars can find themselves isolated and financially diminished, their glamorous public image masking a private life touched by loss and quiet reflection. Anita Ekberg. Anita Ekberg was the ultimate symbol of European glamour in the 1950s and 60s, best remembered for her iconic scene wading through Rome's Trevi Fountain in La Dolce Vita. With her beauty and captivating screen presence, she became a global sensation, adored by photographers and filmmakers alike. To the public, Anita seemed to have it all: beauty, fame, and a jet-set lifestyle surrounded by luxury. But like many Hollywood legends, her life would take a quiet and heartbreaking turn in her later years. Born in Sweden, Anita rose to fame as a model and beauty queen before catching Hollywood's attention. She appeared in a series of films that showcased her charm and allure, and for a time, she was living the dream life in the spotlight. But Hollywood's love for glamour can be fleeting, and Anita's career faded. She lived lavishly during her peak years, but the money dwindled, leaving her financially vulnerable. In her later life, Anita moved to Italy, living mostly in seclusion. Reports surfaced that she faced serious financial difficulties and even had to rely on assistance from friends and film organizations to cover basic expenses. When Anita Ekberg passed away in 2015 at the age of 83, she left behind a legacy of beauty and unforgettable cinema moments, along with a cautionary tale about how fame can vanish, leaving only memories and solitude. Olive Borden. Olive Borden was one of the dazzling beauties of the silent film era, often called the Joy Girl for her radiant screen presence. In the 1920s, she was a rising star, adored by audiences and courted by major studios. Known for her expressive eyes and lively personality, she quickly became one of Hollywood's most promising actresses. But her story is one of the silent era's saddest endings, a tale of sudden decline, financial ruin, and a life that ended far from the luxury of her youth. Olive entered Hollywood as a teenager and signed with Fox Film Corporation, where she starred in a string of successful silent films. Her future seemed limitless. However, the transition from silent films to talkies proved disastrous for her career. The new era demanded a different style of acting and presence, and roles for Olive began to disappear. Without steady work, Olive's once lavish lifestyle became impossible to maintain. She reportedly worked a series of modest jobs, including as a hospital aide, as her fortune slipped away. Friends in the industry that once celebrated her largely forgot her. In 1947, Olive Borden died at just 41 years old in a Los Angeles charity hospital, her glamorous past a distant memory. Her story is a heartbreaking reflection of how quickly Hollywood's golden promises can fade, leaving even its brightest stars to face life's final act in quiet obscurity. Florence Lawrence. Florence Lawrence holds a special place in film history as the world's first true movie star. In the early 1900s, when silent films were still a novelty, she became the face audiences recognized and adored, even before actors' names were widely promoted. Nicknamed the Biograph Girl, she was a pioneer who helped shape Hollywood's very idea of stardom. But behind her historic fame was a life that ended in heartbreak, financial struggles, and lonely obscurity. At her peak, Florence earned admiration across the globe, appearing in hundreds of silent films. Studios eventually began using her name to promote movies, a first in the industry, yet the early Hollywood system offered little security for its stars. Fame was fleeting, and as younger actresses rose, Florence's roles disappeared. She attempted to reinvent herself as an inventor and even created a car signal device, but she gained no lasting financial benefit from her innovations. The Great Depression worsened her hardships. Living alone in a small apartment, she faced mounting health issues and depression. By 1938, Florence Lawrence had passed away at 52, her name all but forgotten by the general public. Her life is a haunting example of Hollywood's earliest lesson. It can create legends overnight, but does little to protect them when the spotlight fades. Florence Lawrence may have been the first movie star, but her tragic ending shows how fame can be both a gift and a silent burden. Marie Prevost. Marie Prevost was a sparkling star of the 1920s, a Canadian-born actress whose charm and comedic timing lit up silent films and early talkies. She appeared in hits like The Marriage Circle and The Beautiful and Damned, often playing lively flappers who embodied the fun and glamour of the jazz age. To audiences, Marie seemed unstoppable, a beauty with talent and a career on the rise. But her story would become one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking examples of how quickly fame and fortune can vanish. Marie's career began with Mack Sennett's famous Bathing Beauties, before she transitioned into major studio films. She was admired for her playful screen presence, but like many silent-era stars, she struggled with the arrival of talking pictures. Roles became scarce, and her career began to decline. As work dried up, Marie's lifestyle drastically changed. She lived in modest apartments, rarely seen by the industry that once celebrated her. Friends and colleagues drifted away, and she battled isolation in her final years. In 1937, at just 38 years old, Marie Prevost passed away alone in her Los Angeles apartment. Her death shocked Hollywood, revealing the quiet desperation she had endured. Marie Prevost's story is a cautionary tale of how the glitter of early Hollywood often hid the struggles of its stars. Her life reminds us that behind the laughter and beauty on screen, there can be a world of loneliness and forgotten dreams. Jack Pickford. Jack Pickford was born into Hollywood royalty, the younger brother of America's sweetheart, Mary Pickford, one of the most famous actresses of the silent era. For a time, Jack seemed destined to share in his sister's golden path. He appeared in silent films throughout the 1910s and 20s and enjoyed a reputation as a charming, carefree figure in the early film community. Sadly, his life would be defined not by his talent, but by a series of personal struggles, reckless choices, and a tragic ending in quiet obscurity. Unlike his sister, who managed her career with careful discipline, Jack was drawn to the temptations of Hollywood nightlife. He lived extravagantly and became known for his partying rather than his performances. His marriages, including one to actress Olive Thomas, were stormy and often filled with public scandal. When Olive tragically died in 1920 during a trip to Paris, Jack's reputation suffered even more, casting a long shadow over his career. As the silent era ended and talking pictures emerged, Jack's film opportunities dwindled. Years of poor financial decisions and personal battles left him with little security. Jack Pickford passed away in 1933, just 36 years old, leaving behind a story of wasted potential and heartbreak. His life serves as a sobering reminder that even Hollywood's first family was not immune to tragedy, loneliness, and the fleeting nature of fame. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer was one of Hollywood's most striking and gifted actresses of the 1930s and 40s, admired for her fierce independence and raw on-screen presence. She starred in films like Come and Get It and Son of Fury, captivating audiences with both her beauty and her refusal to conform to the expectations of the studio system. Yet behind that fearless exterior was a woman whose life would unravel in a series of personal struggles, professional setbacks, and a tragic descent into isolation. Frances never fit the Hollywood mold. She spoke openly against the rigid studio system and bristled at the control exerted over stars, which led to clashes with executives. As her career faltered, her personal life became increasingly turbulent. She faced a series of legal troubles and public scandals that fed sensational headlines, overshadowing her acting talent. In the 1940s, Frances's life took an even darker turn. She was institutionalized for years, enduring treatments that reflected the harsh mental health practices of the time. By the time she emerged, the glamorous world of Hollywood had long moved on without her. She spent her later years far from the spotlight, working modest jobs and living quietly, a shadow of the star she had once been. Frances Farmer passed away in 1970 at just 56 years old. Thanks for watching. If these heartbreaking stories of vintage Hollywood stars who died poor and alone left you stunned, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell for more untold stories from the golden age of film. Do you know of another classic star whose life ended in a way that shocked you? Share their name in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts and stories. Until next time, keep the legends in perspective and the truth in focus. Behind every dazzling spotlight, there's a human story worth remembering.